Welcome, and thank you all so much for joining us for our event, Land is Everything, Women, Climate Crisis, and Extractivism in Uganda, and also beyond, as we'll see today. I'm Alex Webber from Womankind Worldwide, and I'll just pause here briefly to allow our sign language interpreters to interpret my name. We work with partner organizations across the Global South to strengthen women's movements and help them change women and girls' lives around the world. Two of these partners are NAPE and NAWAD, who led the Power Project, which others here will talk about more. Today, our joint event will explore the links between climate change and land issues, such as women losing their land to extractive industries, which are those that extract resources like oil or metals from the earth. We'll highlight the need for solutions based within a climate justice framework and led by women's rights movements and the women they support. We're so grateful to everyone who's joined us here today and hope to send you away with concrete actions in support of this. At this point, I'd like to introduce my co-facilitator, Jennifer Nachitende, and I'll pause for our sign language interpreter, and she's from our partner organization, NAWAD.
Thank you, Alex. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are. I'm Jennifer Nachitende. I work with National Association for Women's Action and Development, NAWAD. NAWAD is a non-government women's rights organization that is based in Uganda. And for the 10 years of its existence, NAWAD empowers women to achieve social justice, environment, sustainability of the management of the environment through capacity building, research, advocacy, and service provision. Today's event is all about the challenges faced by women in Uganda and across the Global South, from climate change and land rights issues. The event will also consider how these challenges intersect and the impact this has on the lives of women. Our event brings together an exceptional group of women fighting to overcome these issues on local, national, and international level. Building on participation and opportunities for women's economic rights was a 27-month project co-led by NAPE, NAWAD, and Womankind Worldwide to strengthen the eco-feminist movement across 4 districts of Uganda to actively promote and protect women's land rights, land ownership, and livelihoods, and gain access to justice to advocate for policy change. The format of the event will be a presentation by Sostine Namanya from NAPE, coming out of the Power Project, followed by a panel discussion focused on finding solutions to these issues and ways to take them forward. This will be followed by audience questions. Members, before we begin, allow me to invite Alex to take you through some technical guidelines.
Thank you so much, Jenny. We'd be grateful if everyone could please submit questions for the Q&A using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. It would be really helpful if you could write which panelist your question is for, if you know. Feel free to submit questions at any time during the event, and Natasha will read them out during the Q&A. For any Zoom issues, please message tech support via the chat function. You can turn on English closed captioning by clicking More, then Live Transcripts. Interpreting is available in Nepali. You can access this by clicking on the interpretation globe on the bottom right of your screen and choosing Nepali. If you want to hear English interpretation when Nepali is spoken, please click the globe and choose English, and Natasha will put the full instructions in the chat. I think they're there too. A community interpreter will accompany one of our panelists, Joan, in person so she can access the event. It therefore won't be possible for the interpreting to take place via Zoom simultaneously, so please allow for some delays at a couple of points in the programme. Our sign language interpreters will be spotlighted throughout the event. I'd like the team to check that because I know there was a comment in the chat about that. If you're using the signing function, please pin the sign language interpreters by clicking on the pin symbol. but they should stay pinned throughout. You'll notice a pause the first time we introduce people to allow the sign language interpreters to spell out their names. Creating a safe and respectful environment is our collective responsibility. If you notice any offensive, discriminatory, or abusive behaviours, please contact tech support in the chat. Finally, we welcome you to share information from today's event on social media using the hashtag CSW66 and tagging Womankind, NAPE, and NAWAD where possible. And Natasha will put those handles in the chat. I'll now hand back to Jenny. Thanks.
Now we hand over to Sostine Namanya for your presentation. Findings from the post-extractive research paper. Sostine, please go ahead.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. Sostine Namanya is my name, and I work for NAPE. And thanks, Jennifer, for that introduction. So today, I'll be talking about the overarching topic of the impacts of extractivism related to women and the current climate crisis, and also give you what the perspectives are from the Ugandan side. Next slide, please. Thank you. The outline, I'll be talking more about the extractive sector and its impact on Uganda. Then I'll also take you through the summary of the power project that Jennifer talked about. And I'll also talk about the insights from the Imagining Future research paper. Next, please. So in Uganda, large-scale extraction of natural resources is causing widespread ecosystem, environmental, and social damage. We see the Ugandan government supporting extractive industries as the primary road to development, but we also witness oil and gas extraction growing in the west and north of Uganda, which includes the pipeline, which includes the airport, which includes the oil roads, but also we see large-scale plantations happening with big companies like Hoima Sugar Limited, and also Atia, for example, in Amuru areas. And all these resources are sitting on land, and they actually require land. And powerful companies like Total Energies, some government and other allies are responsible for seizing this land. Also in Uganda, it's a patriarchal society, which actually gives men greater power over land and property, but also women and their families. We also see that majority of the women are responsible for the farming work, around 76% from the Ugandan agriculture workforce. And unfortunately, the control of land is usually held by men. Men are treated as owners, while women are seen as users of land. Next, please. So globally, women and girls are responsible for an estimated 76% of unpaid care work, home chores, collecting firewood, cooking food, etc. And Uganda is not any different from countries around the world. So when land is taken away, women are losing the means to put food on the table. Their livelihoods in particular are being threatened by this extractive industry. And the recent land disputes over land grabs in the north and west of Uganda due to internal displacements are happening due to the increased land acquisition. And we see this increasing time and time over again. And it's estimated that over 400,000 women have been affected in the north and west of Uganda, and they have been either displaced or at the risk of being displaced. And this is projected to rise by 1 million people by 2023. And the reason is very clear, is because these companies and the governments, they actually need land where they can establish these infrastructures. And what's it all, this issue is being complex and increased because women do not have, are not existing in positions of leadership, but also we see gender inequalities within the communities due to the patriarchal kind of system. But also we see the shrinking civic space, that the fact that civil society, if you confront these injustices, government sees you as anti-development. The post-extractive paper that I'll be talking about along my conversations today was done under the Participation and Opportunities project, which my colleague Jennifer talked about. And this project was done and implemented by NAPE, NAWAD, and Womankind Worldwide. And this project also contributed to the strengthening of the eco-feminist movement in Uganda. So I'll be taking you through a short film, and I'll be able to hear from some of the women that are in the eco-feminist movement. Over to you. We are expecting the 3 minutes video. Thank you so much. Yeah. All right.
I am the chairperson of United Women's Group Ngwedo. We are trying very much to come out and learn and teach our women about land rights, so that when time comes, we shall be ready to face any problem.
Gian mo guru ko na fonye ikom activities enini fonye mano na ta fonye ki mon ni mon mi argu per ka teaching makili gi chand wakto ko belo chan
gange wanitatumweza burandina nyina abana 8 kandi mukazi ayina obulwaire bwa HIV yasakone twalita kalyange kukola oluguudo nyasa kubazamu nawe nyasa kumugambira ebizibu byange n'ensonga yange ata obyagenzere yagenda mu ofisi ya Yunura ati nkokwezi kumulundi n'okutahika abayunura kusanga bayize atwatanka twasayininga nyasayininga kurungi kandi aho akasimu katito bansasoye sente zange kurungi nyayombeka mwenju nyagura itaka nyagura poroti n'ebikwate ebindi ebyo munje binkaba ntayine.
Thank you so much. We'll return to the slide deck.
Don't compare yourself. Don't.
Okay, welcome from that short film. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll return to the slide deck. Thank you. In November 2020, we commissioned and did a research paper, which is titled Reimagining the Future Beyond Extractives. And this paper was co-authored by myself and Dr. Mela. Hi, Mela. And we defined the eco-feminist movement, according to the words that the women told us, as a movement of women to have a say on the protection of the environment, energy and climate justice issues, in addition to agribusiness and extractive industries. More details about the paper, you can find it in the link below. Next slide, please. So the post-extractivist paper confirmed the following issues. One is that the extractivist model harms people, land, and nature so that powerful companies can be able to profit. It was also confirmed that it is one of the causes or the major causes of the global climate warming, which is contributing to the climate crisis and the ecological catastrophe and pollution. And scientists are also warning us that if we go above the 1.5 degrees Celsius, then the damage will be too much and irreversible. It was also confirmed that this kind of model destroys women's livelihoods, apart from women using the land to be able to put food on the table, but they also save surplus, which they sell to get money. It was also confirmed that this kind of model is subjecting women to sexualized violence. Some of the women from the resource host communities have told us that they are able to exchange sex in order to access resources like water wells and other forest for wood, so that they can be able to get these things because they are condoned off by the corporates and other people that are establishing these infrastructures in their communities. It was also confirmed that when land compensation is paid, it goes to the recognized heads of the household. And typically this is always a man who often run away and move to new cities with new girlfriends, but also with new wives. And this certainly always leaves the women and their children without the means to live. This mode of development is creating a lot of inequality across and within countries. Given, for example, Uganda's foreign public debt of $15 billion US, which is some of that money is acquired to be able to invest in those infrastructures. That money is not for putting into basic social health services for women, but it is invested in those infrastructures, which in the end do not help the community and do not also help the planet. We also confirmed that the mainstream narrative that is convenient is the one that is benefiting the capitalist entities. For example, the seed crisis. In Uganda, we have a new bill, the Genetic Engineering Act. And this act is what the corporations and companies are using to acquire community indigenous seeds, patent them, modify them, improve them, and bring the same seeds to our shops to sell to these communities. So here are two issues. The first one is these seeds are not able to be replanted for another season. So it creates a seed dependence syndrome for communities to keep buying from these shops. Yet the indigenous seeds that existed can be replanted for more than one season. And given that also these seeds, they require pesticides. So that means that these crops and the communities have to use the pesticides, which are not environmental friendly, but also the toxins that come with pesticides when you eat the food that has been sprayed, which is not good for the health. Next slide, please. So despite everything that I said above, we see women reimagining another future and resisting this destructive model of development. For example, we see Christine Nyangoma, who said they formed the village savings clubs, and because they do not have access to capital, they have meetings where they teach each other, lend each other money, and also are able to get money, for example, secure land titles, which also leads to them having land security. We also see here a voice of Lubango Twere Women's Group in Noya, where a group of 58 women in solidarity supported a single mother who was being violated and by a rich man. And they were able to confront, negotiate, and this rich man was able to replant the fruit trees and sign off an agreement with the group. Next deck, please. So in this slide deck, we witness resistance in action. We see women protesting the conversion of the Bugoma forest into sugarcane growing. We also see women cycling on International Women's Day to go and hand over a petition to the Bulisa government. Bulisa is one of the districts that is an oil horse district. We also see women protesting land grabs by Wachu. We also see a woman who is proudly wearing an advocacy t-shirt that women are defending land, life, and livelihoods. Next deck, please. So how can you get involved in changing everything that I talked about? One, we need to build alternative economies that are based on community cohesion, not on an individual basis. They have to be co-participation, there has to be construction. There also has to be a whole thing that is dependent on the realities and needs of communities in these resource areas. Two, we need to bring alive the women's everyday actions in the conversations and in the activism that we are having. This is because every single day at the family level, in clan meetings, in communities, women are resisting in their own way, saying no to the injustice that is happening, speaking up on sexual violence and power dynamics. So let these conversations come forward in our activism, and we shall build politics of power for women to challenge a system that is not serving them. Let's also create and nurture women-only spaces, spaces that are for the women, at the women, for the issues that are dear to the women. And let us make them inclusive so that they have women that have disabilities, women that are living with HIV, women that are living in camps. And also let's support their participation by ensuring that there is child support, that there is disability support, because all these two things, child support and disability support, should not be by any chance be a hindrance to women's activism. And lastly, let's conduct further sensitive and non-extractive research. And this is an approach that actually builds messages from women's experiences. This is an approach that will actually create and ensure that women are occupying public spaces. And lastly, to the decision makers, let's end and phase out cooperation extractives and invest in agroecology. In a time where the climate crisis is fighting, we need sustainable indigenous ways of food production. And these are good for the environment, but they're also good for the food production system. But it is also a form of resistance for saying no to the existing corporate seed regime. And lastly, we need these decision makers to invest in an enabling political environment. We need decision makers to make policies that can expand women's rights advocacy work far and wide. So with that, thank you so much. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you so much, Sostine. This was fantastic to hear about and leads us really well into our next section, where our panel will discuss the issues further and offer their recommendations on how to move forward. Would like to ask each of our panelists to tell us more about your work on the issues of climate change and land rights and how they affect women where you are. Please keep up to around 2 to 3 minutes. And we'll start with Joan Tumusiime. I'll pause to let the signer sign her name. Joan is a grassroots women's rights advocate and environmental defender and works on land rights issues for women in her community. Joan, please go ahead.
Ninyowe Joan Tumusiime owa Uganda kurugira kimo mukyalo ekibafo kya Kaboga resettlement mwiboho mu sub-county ya Buseruka mu district ya Hoima. Ninyowe mukyala ayabaire mu abantu abatalibanizibwa abayihiriwe heitaka lyabo.
Can I just say I'm only hearing the Ugandan and not the English, and I have clicked on the English in the...
Sorry, just to say that I was just typing in the chat, we will all hear Joan speaking in Runyoro, and then you will hear the translation following that in English. Please continue, Joan.
Apologies.
Ninyowe omo yabaire ninyo mukyala omo ali aba abantu abatalibanizibwa government byatuhire heitaka lyaitu nibagenda kuteekaho oil refinery ogw'2012 itwe nk'abakyala kurugira kimu Kabaale abatalibanizibwa oil refinery tufunire bizibu bingi kusigikira na mlingo batuleesere haki ya Kaboga resettlement ogw'2018 kurugo ogw'2018 kuruga twayizire haki ya Kaboga resettlement ebyapa byaitu tibaka bituheerezaga nkaitwe tumanyira itaka eryo lyaitu oba tiriri lyaitu. Then twine ekizibu ekindi kya pipeline ekyo eri yalaba mu eryo itaka lyenyine lya gavumenti yatuhaire kurugira kimu Buliisa kira kimu Kabaale gavumenti akakyola yahakana abo abantu kyola kukozesa itaka lyabo. So twine ensonga endi y'okutiina mbu pipeline egi yalabiremu ekusobola kuleetaho obuzibu ettaka lyaitu nerisiisa then ne siisa n'ebyobuhangwa bitukuba tuteireho. Then kya Kaboga settlement kuga batuleesereyo amaizi agatwine tigali marungi kusigikira ebibire bibatemere nka Bugoma bagitemere habwokuba abagaiga bakwenda kuteekamu ebikaijo. Then twaija airport eiba ekisaike enyonyi kibatuteereyoho ekibakombeka Kabaale nakyo kitabanizibwa muno bateme emiti. Then enguudo zibaikaire nibakola zitemere emiti zisisire ebisaalo ekyo kyona nikireeterezebwa okubulwa amaizi nkaito abakyala ba Kaboga oba okugenda nita abakyala bakuleeta amaizi nita abakyala bakusenya enku nita abakyala bakola ekintu kyona ebyo bireetereze muno empindukahinduka y'obwire muno omukubyala sizoni zihindukire bwire buno namba tukubaliza tukafunaga n'enjura kugamba nti tubyale ebimera byaitu omusana mwingi oba ogenda oluziremu nkaita abakyala ba Kaboga tukubonaabona muno tutwina amaizi tukulibata engendo ziraira muno tukulibata kilometers 6 kuruga nambali tuli nitugenda hakisaro ekituli obuhaihi eki kibakweta Wambabya niho tugenda ntuyiha amaizi. Then twine ekizibu kindi ekyo utabanguko maka kikuleeterezebwa habwa abasajja omusajja bagenda afunire omukazi ondi iwe nakuranka akasasiro habwokuba oli munaku enaku naye kuleeta obutabanguko maka. Then utugenda tulozere engende zizirayo ezitukulivata kugenda kuteeza enku kugenda kutoza amaizi nazo zireeterezeibwe abasajja baitu kutweraliikirira bundi tubaire mu bintu ebindi. Then twajja hansonga egenyenyine eyenjuzi batombekeire enjuzi batombekeire zona ziri hamu nkutwagamba ziri mu kampu twena tutubikenga abaana baitu bona bakukura basisikaira abo enju abenganda bakubaterereire nibarula benganda bwire buno tibakusobola abarora yone eri kampu enju zona ziri hamu. Then eitaka batuhaire nkati abakyala ba Kaboga mwijuka abakyala nita abalima nita abalimira abaana baitu tulimana ebintu ebyokulya kireeterezebwa muno eitaka lyeteri lyenyine linkubaza liyomere nombwire buno nambali nkubaliza busa omuntu wena yakalimire habwokuba eitaka lyomere muno tirina miti. Then tirina muna n'oluwezo olukumara okusigikira haitaka lyeteri abaire nka Kabaale nambali twarugire. Then nkaita abakyala twagamba ebyo byonna tubimazireho tukozere tutanka abakyala ba Kaboga resettlement twagamba tunakwandika twakomere twazihandika twaziteekayo ziriyo. Then twagamba nkaita abakyala tulina kwekoleramu mulimo tutandikeho emizaano tuzine nituwimukya ensonga zaitu haiguru. then twagamba abakyala tukozere tuta twatandikaho groups ezibakwesere group z'abakyala group ezo zituyambire mu kwetangana tukahulirizangana ki ensonga mune zikuluma abakyala abo abakyala baliyo hantu kuhuliriza ensonga ezo then twagamba abakyala tuyambangane mu groups ezo twatandika kuyambangana nk'abakyala nituyambangana mu nsonga ezimu n'ezimu then twagamba habwaki tutatandikaho emiti kitwina mu Kyakaboga resettlement tukozere tuta kugumyaho ebyobuhangwa byaitu twagamba leka nkati abakyala tutandikaho okulunda enjoki twatandika kulunda enjoki ezo zituhaire akasente tuhiremu obwoki enjoki tuziremu obwoki twasobola kutunda esente ezo zenyini nitwezeyambisa kwehora nituzehora mu groups zaitu nituzitwala nizisobola tuyamba then twagamba ite nk'abakyala tutandikaho obusiri bwa haka twatandikaho obusiri bwa haka obusiri obwo butuyambire muno kulya omukulya then butuyambire n'okutunda tukafuna akasente twagamba ite abakyala tutandike kubyalaho emiti nikwegumyeho obuhangwa bwaitu busobole kugumaho so mwebale muno okumpuliriza ebyange ndibyebyo bisobole kubasobola.
Thank you very much. My name is Joan Tumusiime of Kyakaboga Resettlement Village in Buseruka Sub-County, Hoima District. I'm one of the women that were affected by the oil pipeline in 2012, when government acquired 29 square kilometers of land for a refinery to be constructed in Hoima District. Since that time, us as women of Kyakaboga, we have been faced with a lot of challenges, as I'm going to highlight. We lack land titles. When our land was taken in 2012, government promised to relocate us to Kyakaboga, and we were relocated in 2018. Since then, government promised to give us land titles. To date, government has not given us land titles, and we are just wondering whether we are the right owners of land, and we are suspicious that anybody, especially the land grabbers, can come and take away the land. And at the same time, the feeder oil pipeline that is running from Bulisa, where the central processing facility has been constructed, has also encroached on us by taking away some of our land. And we are worried because when compensation comes, we might be compensated as customary land tenure owners. And yet we were supposed to be compensated with a lot of money with our titles. And also we were stopped from cultivating perennial crops like bananas, like cassava, and even planting trees. And yet we needed to plant such crops because they are one of our major crops. And also we find that when government took away our land, a lot of activities have taken place, like the construction of the airport in Kabale, and also the oil roads that have been constructed in the region, and also the cutting of Bugoma forest. All those have led to environmental degradation and putting us as women at a risk. The seasons have changed. There is prolonged drought. As we talk now, the rains have not yet come, and yet we are supposed to be planting now. There are also limited water supply for domestic use, where us as women and our girl children, we are forced to walk very long distances in search for water for domestic use. For instance, we are forced to walk 6 kilometers to go and fetch water from Wambabia village, where sometimes we take long there, and our husbands have become suspicious. They think that maybe we have gone for wrongdoing, and that one has also caused domestic violence. Domestic violence has also been caused by poverty in homes where there is reduced food production for household use and also for commercial use. We would sell some crops and we would get some support to our homes. And also, when we talk about the land that we were given at Kyakaboga, we were transferred from Kavale. We had fertile land. We had many sources of water, the streams and rivers. And when we were brought to Kyakaboga, the soil that we were given is infertile, and we are expecting that the food production is going to reduce and reduce. And yet, we are expected to provide food for household use and also be able to sell and get some income. So when it comes to us as women, we find that there is limited access to fuel wood. Many trees and forests are cut. We are forced to walk very long distances in search for fuel wood. And we are forced to go without meals sometimes because we cannot afford to get firewood to cook food. So many issues are disturbing us as women. And that's why we see that when us as women, we are affected by climate and land rights, it is the entire household which is basically affected. So I therefore call upon all listeners to bear with us. I thank you so much. I remain Joan.
Joan, thank you so much for sharing the challenges that you and other women have experienced and what you've done to overcome these. It was really fantastic to hear your perspective and to learn about what's happening for women where you are. So we'll now seek to broaden out the discussion to beyond Uganda to locate the situation in the context of the wider global South. Now, we were going to hear from Nyambura next, but I don't think she's on the call as yet. So we'll come back to her even when she joins, and we'll move now to Junita Rai. Junita joins us from the National Indigenous Women's Federation, where she is General Secretary. Junita, please go ahead, and we'd love to hear your focus on these issues. Thank you.
सम्पूर्णमा फेरि पनि नमस्कार. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. म चाहिँ जुनिता राई राष्ट्रिय आदिवासी जनजाति महिला महासंघबाट चाहिँ महासचिवको पदमा यहाँहरु समक्ष उपस्थित भएको छु र राष्ट्रिय आदिवासी जनजाति महिला महासंघले अहिलेसम्म आदिवासी महिलाहरूको भूमि अधिकार सम्बन्धी धेरैवटा अभियानहरू हामीले सञ्चालन गरेका छौं, रिसर्च गरेका छौं र हामीले जलवायु परिवर्तन सम्बन्धी पनि हाम्रो आदिवासी महिलाहरू नेपालमा धेरै पीडित छौं. हामी भूमि अधिकार खोसिएको पनि हामीलाई पीडा छ र जलवायु परिवर्तनले गर्दाखेरि हामीले धेरै प्राकृतिक रूपमा चाहिँ हाम्रो प्राकृतिक स्रोतहरू चाहिँ विनाश हुँदै गएको छ र हामी चाहिँ त्यो विनाशसँगै हामीले महिला भएकै कारणले हामीले घर परिवार चलाउनलाई हाम्रा जीविकोपार्जन हाम्रो संस्कार संस्कृतिहरू धान्नका लागि हामी सबैभन्दा आदिवासी महिलाहरू नेपालमा चाहिँ पीडित छौं. आदिवासी महिलाहरू चाहिँ नेपालमा विशिष्ट पहिचान भएको एउटा महिलाहरू हुन्, आदिवासीहरू समुदायहरू हुन् जसको चाहिँ परम्परा, जसको जीवन पद्धति, जसको जीविकोपार्जन र परम्परागत अभ्यासहरू नै प्रकृतिसँग जोडिन्छ, भूमिसँग जोडिन्छ र ती त्यस्ता आदिवासी महिलाहरू, ती त्यस्ता आदिवासीहरूलाई अहिले हाल आएर विभिन्न खालका विकास निर्माणका क्रियाकलापहरू, कम्पनीहरू जति पनि छन्, हाइड्रोहरूले चाहिँ आदिवासी महिलालाई प्रत्यक्ष रूपमा प्रभाव पारेको छ. जसको उदाहरण चाहिँ हाइड्रोले गर्दाखेरि जुन त्यो हाइड्रो बनाउँदाखेरि पानीहरू माथि नै लगिन्छ, सुकाइन्छ र जुन बिजुली उत्पादन गरिन्छ, तर त्यसको तलको भागहरू सबै सुक्खा भएर जान्छ र सिङ्गै आदिवासीहरूले जसको चाहिँ परम्परा पेशा चाहिँ त्यो नदीसँग जोडिएको हुन्छ, त्यो खोलासँग जोडिएको हुन्छ, जसको चाहिँ जीविका कृषिमा चाहिँ निर्धारित हुन्छ, आधारित हुन्छ, उनीहरूको चाहिँ पुरै एउटा जातिको संस्कार संस्कृति नामित हुन्छ भने अर्को चाहिँ कृषिमा निर्भर भएको आदिवासीहरू चाहिँ त्यो पानी चाहिँ बिना चाहिँ उनीहरूको खेत, उनीहरूको बारी चाहिँ पुरै मरुभूमि भएको छ, जसले गर्दा उनीहरू त्यहाँबाट विस्थापन भएर अर्को ठाउँमा जानुपर्छ र आदिवासीहरू एउटा ठाउँबाट अर्को ठाउँमा जाने अथवा एउटा पैतृक भूमिबाट अर्को ठाउँमा विस्थापन भइरहँदाखेरि उसको भाषा हराउँछ, उसको संस्कार हराउँछ, उसको संस्कृति हराउँछ, उसको जीवन पद्धति, उसको परम्पराहरू हराउँछ र ऊ त्यो ठाउँबाट नयाँ ठाउँमा जाँदा ऊ आफ्नो भाषामा आफ्नो कुराहरू चाहिँ अभिव्यक्त गर्न सक्दैन। आफ्ना हरेक उसले चाहिँ सुरक्षाको कारणले चाहिँ त्यहाँ सुरक्षाको प्रश्न हुन्छ, उसको चाहिँ उसको जीवनमा जति पनि आफ्नो जति पनि कल्चरमा चाहिँ ऊ डिपेन्ड भएको कुराहरू प्राकृतिक स्रोत साधनमा, ज्ञान सिपमा, कलामा उसले जसरी जीवन चलाइरहेको हुन्छ, निर्वाह गरिरहेको हुन्छ, त्यो टोटल्ली ऊ त्यहाँबाट वञ्चित हुँदाखेरि उसको जीवन चाहिँ अत्यन्तै गरिबीमा र दुःखद भएर जान्छ, जसले गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ हामीले चाहिँ हाम्रो आदिवासीहरूलाई भूमिबाट हामीलाई वञ्चित गर्नु हुँदैन भनेर आदिवासी महिला महासङ्घले चाहिँ रिसर्च गरेर एउटा अडान पत्र पनि बनाएका छौँ, जुन चाहिँ आदिवासी महिलाहरूको भूमिप्रति चाहिँ यो हुनुपर्छ, हाम्रो अडान यो हो, हाम्रो पोजिसन चाहिँ यो हो भनेर हामीले चाहिँ तय गरिसकेका छौँ भने हामी प्राकृतिक स्रोत साधनमा हाम्रो पहुँच हुनुपर्छ र यो पहुँचबाट हामीलाई अलग्याइने बित्तिकै हाम्रा ज्ञान सिप, हाम्रा जीवन पद्धतिहरू, हाम्रो परम्पराहरू सबै अलगिन्छ, भाषा अलगिन्छ, जसको चाहिँ पहिचान बिना हाम्रो अस्तित्व रहँदैन र त्यो अस्तित्व भनेको जोगाउने भनेका आदिवासी महिला हुन्, जो चाहिँ आदिवासी महिलाहरूले आफ्ना संस्कार संस्कृतिहरू, आफ्ना भाषाहरू सबैभन्दा बढी चाहिँ महिलाहरूमा निर्भर भएको हुन्छ, किनभने वेशभूषा पनि महिलाले नै लाउँछ र भाषा पनि पहिलो कुरा आमासँग बच्चाको एट्याचमेन्ट आमासँग हुनाले उसले बोलेको भाषा चाहिँ उसको सन्तानले सिक्ने र त्यो चाहिँ पुस्तान्तरण हुने भएको हुनाले त्यो चाहिँ आमाबाट नै भाषा बचेको हुन्छ भनेर हामी दाबी गर्छौँ। महिलाहरूले वेशभूषा लगाइदिन्छ, गरगहना लगाइदिन्छ, त्यसले गर्दाखेरि त्यो संस्कार संस्कृतिमा पनि पहिचानको मुख्य आधार चाहिँ महिलाले जोगाएको हुन्छ र विभिन्न सांस्कृतिक कार्यक्रमहरू, सम्पदाहरू, पूजाआजाहरू, विभिन्न कुरा चाहिँ मातृसत्तात्मक हाम्रो जुन अभ्यास छ त्यसले गर्दा महिलामा निर्भर हुन्छ र महिलाले गर्दाखेरि त्यो सबै सम्पूर्णता चाहिँ महिलाद्वारा हुन्छ भनेर चाहिँ हामीले दावा गर्छौँ र ती कुराहरू चाहिँ महिलाहरूलाई जलवायु परिवर्तनको कारणले पनि हामीलाई कठिनाइ भएको छ र जति पनि नीति निर्माण तहमा अथवा वन उपभोक्ता समितिकै कुरा गर्नुहुन्छ भने वनकै कुरा गर्नुहुन्छ भने वन उपभोक्ता समितिमा पहिले आदिवासी महिलाहरूको चाहिँ एक्सेस थिएन, चेतना थिएन, जुन कुराले गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ हामीलाई प्राकृतिक स्रोत साधनहरूमा चाहिँ हामीले प्रयोग त गर्थ्यौँ, हामीलाई ज्ञान त थियो, सिप त थियो, तर त्यहाँ चाहिँ हामीलाई एउटा वन उपभोक्ता समितिले अथवा वन ऐनले अथवा निकुञ्जले आरक्षण क्षेत्रले चाहिँ हामीलाई त्यहाँ विभिन्न ऐन ल्याएर कानुन बनाएर चाहिँ हामीलाई त्यहाँ जानमा त्यो तत्त वस्तुहरू सङ्कलन गर्नलाई, सांस्कृतिक क्रियाकलापहरू गर्नलाई रोक लगाइएको थियो। त्यसले गर्दाखेरि हामीलाई चाहिँ हाम्रो अधिकारबाट वञ्चित गराइएको थियो। तर पछिल्लो टाइम हामीलाई चाहिँ वुमेनकाइन्डले चाहिँ सपोर्ट गर्नुभयो, त्यसले गर्दाखेरि हामीले अब वनमा हाम्रो एक्सेस कसरी गर्ने, त्यहाँ नीति निर्माण तहमा हामी कसरी हाम्रो रोल चाहिँ भूमिकालाई चाहिँ हामी बलियो बनाउने र हामीले त्यहाँ नीति निर्माण बनाइरहँदाखेरि हाम्रो उपस्थिति अथवा हाम्रो सहभागिता चाहिँ अर्थपूर्ण हुनुपर्छ भन्ने हामीले दावा गर्नलाई एउटा रिसर्च गर्ने जुन सपोर्ट गर्नुभयो त्यो सपोर्टले गर्दाखेरि अहिले हाम्रो आदिवासी महिलाहरू ती समितिहरूमा आफ्नो सहभागिता सुनिश्चित गर्नुभएको छ र सहभागिता सुनिश्चित मात्र होइन, हामीले त्यो नीति निर्माण तहमा भाइटल रोलमा चाहिँ हामी पुग्नुपर्छ र अर्थपूर्ण सहभागिता हुनुपर्छ भन्ने हाम्रो दावा रहेको हुनाले अहिले चाहिँ हामी ती ठाउँहरूमा पुग्न सफल भएको छ। यसको श्रेय चाहिँ हामीले वुमनकाइन्डलाई दिने गरेको छ र वुमनकाइन्डको सहयोगमा हामीले रिसर्च गरेर यो बुक पनि एउटा पब्लिस गरेका छौँ, जसले गर्दाखेरि हाम्रो आदिवासी महिलाहरूले वनमा यस्ता समितिहरूमा जानुपर्छ भन्ने चेतनालाई वृद्धि भएको छ र अहिले हामी बिस्तारै त्यहाँ अगाडि बढ्दैछौँ र जलवायु परिवर्तन सम्बन्धी पनि नेपाल सरकारले विभिन्न समयमा विभिन्न खाले नीतिहरू अगाडि ल्याएको छ। नेपाल सरकारको यो सरकारी स्तरमा भइरहेको कार्यक्रमहरू जस्तै स्थानीय तहमा चाहिँ लापा लोकल एडाप्टेसन प्लान फर एक्सन कार्यक्रम भइरहेको छ भने अर्को राष्ट्रिय स्तरमा चाहिँ नापा नेसनल एडाप्टेसन प्लान फर एक्सन भइरहेको छ र न्याप भन्ने नेसनल एडाप्टेसन प्लान रेड प्लस स्ट्राटेजी बनेको छ, जलवायु परिवर्तन नीति 2019 बनेको छ। यी सबै कार्यक्रम रणनीति बनेर पनि आदिवासीहरूको सामूहिक अधिकारलाई सम्मान भएको छैन, फेरि पनि पर्याप्त भएको छैन भनेर हामी भन्न चाहन्छौँ र हामीलाई क्लाइमेट चेन्ज सम्बन्धी धेरै कार्यक्रमहरू गर्न सकिरहेका छैनौँ। हामीले चाहिँ अहिले आदिवासी महिलाहरूको एक्सेसलाई कसरी वृद्धि गर्ने, कसरी उनीहरूको चेतनालाई ग्रामीण भेगका महिलाहरूलाई चाहिँ कसरी चेतना चाहिँ उहाँहरूको वृद्धि गर्ने, उहाँहरूको जुन क्षमतालाई कसरी अभिवृद्धि गर्ने भन्नेमा नै हाम्रो ध्यान केन्द्रित भएको छ र हामीले चाहिँ क्लाइमेट चेन्जमा पनि भर्खरै केही कामहरू गर्न थालेका छौँ र त्यो भनेको चाहिँ अबको दिनहरूमा हामीले जलवायु परिवर्तन भइरहँदाखेरि मिटिगेसन एडप्टेसन अनि कसरी गर्न सकिन्छ र वातावरण अनुकूलन हुने के कामहरू गर्न सकिन्छ त्यसलाई प्रत्यक्ष रूपमा कृषिसँग जोडेर हाम्रो संस्कृतिसँग जोडेर त्यसलाई हामीले अब निकट भविष्यमै त्यसलाई चाहिँ हामीले लागू गर्दैछौँ। यस्ता तालिमहरू चाहिँ हामीले सम्बन्धित ग्रामीण क्षेत्रमा जो चाहिँ एकदमै ग्रामीण क्षेत्रमा जो आदिवासी महिलाहरू प्रत्यक्ष रूपमा कृषिसँग जोडेका छन् तर एडप्टेसन र मिटिगेसन सम्बन्धी उहाँहरूलाई जानकारी छैन, ती कार्यक्रमहरू लगेर उहाँहरूलाई जानकारी गराएर वातावरण अनुकूलन सम्बन्धी हामीले चाहिँ जलवायु परिवर्तनलाई चाहिँ कसरी रोक्न सकिन्छ र कसरी वातावरणलाई चाहिँ जोगाउन सकिन्छ, वातावरण मैत्री कसरी कार्यक्रमहरू लान सकिन्छ र हाम्रो जीवनयापन कसरी चाहिँ त्यसरी अगाडि बढाउन सकिन्छ भन्ने खालका हामीले ट्रेनिङहरू अगाडि बढाएर जलवायु परिवर्तन सम्बन्धी पनि राष्ट्रिय आदिवासी जनजाति महिला महासङ्घले कार्यक्रमहरू अगाडि बढाउँदैछ भनेर यहाँहरूलाई जानकारी गराउँदै मैले अन्तमा चाहिँ छोटो सुझावको रूपमा चाहिँ ग्रामीण क्षेत्रका महिलामा जलवायु परिवर्तन तथा आदिवासी कृषिलाई जोडेर जुन छलफलहरू अगाडि बढाएको छ त्यो अर्थपूर्णको अनिवार्यतालाई लागू गर्नुपर्ने, स्थानीय महिलाका आवाज आवश्यकता समस्यालाई ग्राह्यता दिनुपर्ने र यस्ता सपोर्टहरू भयो भने राष्ट्रिय आदिवासी जनजाति महिला महासङ्घले ग्रामीण क्षेत्रमा भएका आदिवासी महिलाहरूलाई आफ्नो अधिकार सम्बन्धी जनचेतनामूलक कार्यक्रमहरू अगाडि बढाएर आदिवासी महिलाहरूको जीवनलाई सरल र अधिकारलाई सुनिश्चित गराउने हाम्रो एउटा उद्देश्य छ। त्यसलाई चाहिँ हामी बिस्तारै स्टेप बाई स्टेप चाहिँ अगाडि बढाउने हाम्रो चाहिँ लक्ष्य छ र जुन यो इभेन्टको लागि महिला महासङ्घलाई यो समय दिनुभयो, यहाँहरूलाई धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद। अगाडि प्रश्न आयो भने म यहाँहरूको प्रश्नको जवाब दिने भरपूर कोसिस गर्नेछु। धन्यवाद। नमस्ते।
Thank you so much, Junita. For the audience, we will take questions later in the Q&A section. But just to say, it was very powerful to hear about the barriers faced by Indigenous women where you are and the importance of identity and culture to them and the impact when they're separated from this. I would love to talk more about all you've told us about. It was fantastic, but we do need to move on. So thank you so much. So we'll now come to Sostine Sherbet. Sostine has been engaging in the climate justice movement for more than a decade. After fighting for climate justice and community-based energy solutions at European level, Sostine is now leading the climate justice work at Friends of the Earth, Germany. Sostine, a slightly amended version of the question for you, acknowledging you're based in the global north. How have you seen these issues, these land issues and climate issues, affect women and girls in the global south through your work? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. I hope everybody can hear me. Yes, great. I first want to thank you for the invitation today. It's really fascinating to listen to you and to hear different voices. And that's exactly, I think, how I also kind of got into the work of climate justice, to be together with actually fascinating female leaders. And like we heard already from great people like Sostine or Joan or Junita, and that's really inspiring. And I see even more inspiring young women raising their voice through the Fridays for Future or other kind of movements that really people, and especially young women, stand up for the future. But of course, that's one side only. And I'm very glad that I have that opportunity to meet those women. But what you said, Alex, I'm from the Global North. I'm currently in Brussels, where in Belgium, where the European decisions are made, but working for Friends of the Earth in Germany. But I don't want to focus so much on the Global North, but rather keep the discussions where we have them right now. And of course, we have here, the women have already many rights, I would say, but we deal with slightly different issues, like we are fighting for decreasing the salary gaps between men and women. We fight for that women are more in high-level positions than currently men are still much more. But I see there are quite some differences in kind of how women and girls are really affected in the Global North and the Global South. And often it's actually frightening and also shocking to hear those things, because I would say, like in Germany or where I am in Belgium, it's not talked about, right? We don't hear about those stories we are hearing here in the webinar today, or we are listening in other places. So it's really not common that we are knowing about what's happening in the communities. How are you affected? What are your conditions? We heard a lot about today domestic violence. We heard about hard conditions in terms of getting water or other examples. And I feel that's one of my role. We try really to support the narratives like we hear today, and also really support specific cases, being in solidarity, and whenever we can, bringing people to decision makers like in the European Union or to Germany or other countries, to really get the stories from the ground and to empower women and girls in that way. And you do see still often that we try to speak about the women or the girls, but I think we have to speak, let them speak much more for themselves, right? And I find that really important. And the example I just gave, that we bring, for example, women or girls, young women, to decision makers or to the platform, bring them into the movements and connect as much as possible and let them tell the stories. And if we don't do that, I feel it's my duty, it's my responsibility. And if we don't do that, then we will see much more the crisis, the interlinked crisis will increase, the conditions of the women, like in African countries or in other countries in the Global South, will worsen. And that is important that people understand what are the causes, what are the conditions, and how the women in particular and young women are treated. So later maybe I say a bit more about what I think the role of the Global North, of countries like my country, Germany or Belgium or the EU, should do. But maybe I leave it also, because of time, I leave it for the moment with that as a bit of an introduction.
Thank you so much, Susie. That was fantastic. It was really useful to get started of getting that international perspective on the issues from you, and to start to consider what more the Global North can be doing. Thank you. Yes, there will be time to go more into that in the following questions. But now, as time is moving on, and we want to give the chance for audience questions soon, I'm going to skip ahead in the program a bit and move on to a question for all of our panelists about movements. So what roles, and this is to everyone, I'll take you through, what roles do the eco-feminist movement and women's movements more broadly have to play, and how are they important in helping to find solutions? Now, Joan and Beatrice, are you happy for us to come to you next? And if so, it would be really helpful, Joan, if you could speak in smaller chunks, and then Beatrice could interpret a bit at a time, just so it's accessible for everyone. Joan and Beatrice, are you ready? I can repeat the question. Joan Tumusiime? Okay, I'll repeat the question. What role does the eco-feminist movement and women's movements more broadly have to play? And how are they important, these movements, in helping to find solutions? Please keep to around 3 minutes, although obviously we'll allow extra time for interpreting. Thank you.
Amabara gange ninyo Joan Tumusiime kugira kimu Uganda. Kugira kimu Buseruka sub-county district ya Hoima. Songa icha yara twesoreze hamu na muno abakyala abo abatalibanizibwa gwa kabiri na pipeline twayesoroleza hamu abakyala twandika petitions omwaba abantu abatwakomera abakutwekulembera haiguru okwo niho twahandikire chairman LC5 twahandikira MP w'abakyala twamuhandikira nawe then twahandikira na Minister of Energy nayo twagihandikira nitusaba muno ebyapa byaitu then twagamba abakyala petitions ezo zituhandikire katunihire zijja kutuyamba nambali tukubaliza petitions ezo tukazihandika nitusaba amaizi balengereho kwija kuserura amaizi nambali gali batu nambali nkubaliza ebyoma bimu babiteemba amaizi tigaliwo then twagamba abakyala tweseze hamu amanyi ebizibu ebyabo nk'abakyala bakozere bata era na hamu mu groups tusobole kumara ensonga ezimu z'abakyala ezikutabaniza Kaboga resettlement.
And make one voice as women that were affected by the refinery first and now being affected by the pipeline. We have written petitions informing government that we need our land titles and also we need safe and clean water. So these petitions were presented to our local leaders, that is the chairperson, local council 5 at the district level, and our woman member of parliament and the Ministry of Energy. As we talk now, we have seen the central government coming up working on our water system. So I think that coming together, there is a way we amplify our voices and our voices can be heard.
Aho niho tukwizira nk'abakyala ba Kaboga settlement tukesoroleza hamu tukatandika he groups ezikusobola kutweta hamu tukahura ensonga zaitu ezikutuluma nkaita abakyala then tukesoroleza hamu tukagamba abakyala tumazirohota ensonga ezo zikututabaniza niho abakyala twagamba abakyala tulina kuyambangana niko tusobole kuyimuka iraka lyaitu haiguru.
As women of Kaboga, we have and share experiences and we are able to discuss issues that affect us as women, and we come up with the solutions on how best we can deal with these issues that affect us as women and our girl children. We have so far formed the group, and we are able to even make credit and saving and do other activities that uplift our socio-economic livelihood as women.
Abakyala ngati abakyala bakyakaboga tukagamba obuhangwa tubugumizeho tuta twagamba katutandikeho okulunda enjoki twatandika kulunda enjoki amukachweka nokirabangu tukafunira ebyapa baitu tukafuna omuntu ayasoboire kutuhereza akachweka keitaka twatandika kulunda enjoki nambali nkubaliza enjoki ezo zituyamba tuhereza obwo tukutunda ntufunamu akasente ako tusobola gabana nitukeehora nitusobola garura amagoba nituyimukyangana omu maiso.
And secondly, we have also we have highly earmarked a piece of land, and one of our friends gave us a land where we were able to plant more indigenous trees. And as we talk, we have established an apiary. We are keeping bees, and we are able to harvest honey for our household use. And we also use honey as medicine. And also we are able to sell honey to uplift our incomes at household level. In this case, us as women of Kyakaboga, we have been able to support the household needs through the money we collect from the saving and loans, where you need some money and you return limited interest.
Abakyala bakyakaboga tukasamu twaga kuntu obuku edodo obugora nuko tusobole kulya nuko tusobole okufuna ebyokulya nitutunda ntukyola ntufunamu akasente nambali nkubaliza ebyo ebintu ebitwakozere ebintu bibiri okulunda enjoki hamu n'okukola obusiri bwa haka nambali nkubaliza bwire buno abantu batandikire kifora ky'oburambuzi abantu bakwija nibahikira mu kichweka kyaitu nibarora nibagamba abakyala bakyakaboga mukora ki nitusanga ngati abakyala bakyakaboga tukulunda enjoki nituyimukia obuhanga bwaitu hamu n'okulima obusiri bwa haka.
Us as women of Kyakaboga, through the support of National Association of Professional Environmentalists in NAPE, we were able to establish kitchen gardens. As we talk, each and every household at least has got some established kitchen gardens. We have planted onions, we have planted vegetables like amaranthus, we have planted tomatoes and cabbages and others. Through this,
I can see we're having some connectivity difficulties here. I'm just going to pause and check if Joan can hear me. I'm sorry to, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, Beatrice. We're going to have to move on. Could I ask you just to bring to a close what Joan was saying, please? Thank you. Please do finish what you were saying there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are able to complement on the household needs through selling of kitchen gardens, and many people are coming from outside the sub-county and the district, and when they come, they are very much impressed, and we are becoming a tourist attraction area because of the kitchen gardens.
Thank you all. I'm so sorry, Joan. We are going to have to move on to the next person, but there will be more chance to speak in the audience questions. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you.
Is there anything you wanted to say to round off what you were saying, or are you happy to move on and speak in the audience questions?
I think she has.
mbaire ningamba abakyala abakyakaboga tukalengaho kulola nti twayemezaho byobuhangwa twatandika kubyala emiti abo kwa tutasange kyakaboga resettlement emiti yona twatandika kubyala emiti then twagamba abakyala tukozere tuta omasomero.
To conclude, clean water and also talking about as women riding bicycles and with the charts and telling our leaders that we need safe food, that we need our girl children in school. And we have also gone ahead to establish music, dance, and drama as a way of speaking to our leaders that we need land rights protected, we need environmental protection, and we need our voice as women to be heard.
Thank you so much. And thank you for getting through those technical difficulties there. That was really powerful. And thank you so much for this reminder on the importance of hearing women's voices on these issues and the great practical examples as people in the chat are commenting. Moving on to the rest of our panel. Now, I know, Sostine, you have already talked about movements in your presentation, so perhaps we can come to you more again in the audience questions. So I'm now going to move back to Junita. The same question: what role do the eco-feminist movement and women's movements have to play, and how important are they in helping to find solutions? We are particularly interested in hearing how Indigenous women are resisting. Very grateful if you could keep it to 3 minutes as far as possible so that we have time for some audience questions. Thank you, Junita, and then we'll finish after that with Suzanne.
Personal, sorry, sir. Personal, एकचोटि मलाई अलिकति नेट डिस्टर्ब भयो. एकचोटि प्लिज.
Translators, can you hear Junita?
Eco सम्बन्धी eco-feminist.
We're not hearing the interpreters right now. Erica or Anim, could you hear?
The interpreters are just sharing in Nepali.
Thank you, sure. What role do the eco-feminist movement and women's movements more broadly have to play, and how are they important in helping to find solutions to these issues? Particularly interested in hearing how Indigenous women are resisting, and keeping to 3 minutes if possible. Thank you.
प्रश्नको लागि धन्यवाद. इको-फेमिनिस्ट जुन एउटा तपाईको प्रश्नमा जुन भन्नुभयो त्यो चाहिँ असाध्यै महत्त्वपूर्ण छ. खास गरेर आदिवासी महिलाहरू असाध्यै प्रकृतिसँग नजिक हुन्छ र प्रकृति मैत्रीहरू भनेको पनि आदिवासीहरू नै हुन् र आदिवासी महिलाहरू नै हुन् र यसलाई चाहिँ हामीले वातावरण मैत्री क्रियाकलापहरू जस्तै प्लास्टिकहरू प्रयोग नगर्ने र वन जङ्गलहरूसँग एकदमै प्रकृतिलाई चाहिँ एकदम संरक्षण गर्ने र आफ्नो घरमा पनि बोट बिरुवाहरू एकदमै बढी लगाउने र कृषिमा पनि जो चाहिँ असाध्यै यो व्यावसायिक नभइकन एउटा प्रकृतिलाई माया गरेर जुन किसिमको एउटा भूमिकाहरू निर्वाह गर्ने आदिवासी महिलाहरूको अभ्यास छ, आदिवासीहरूको अभ्यास छ, त्यसलाई नै हामीले निरन्तरता दियो र हामी परम्परागत जुन एउटा हामीले पुस्तादेखि गरेर ल्याएको जुन एक खालको वातावरणसँग प्रकृतिसँग रहेको एट्याचमेन्ट जुन छ त्यसलाई नै कायम राख्यो भने सोल्युसन पनि त्यसरी नै हुन्छ र हामी समाधान उन्मुख पनि त्यसरी हुन्छौँ भन्ने भन्न चाहन्छु।
Thank you. So important to remember. I'm going to move us quickly on to Susie. So finally, Susie, what role do you feel that eco-feminist movements and women's movements more broadly have to play here, and how are they important in helping to find solutions? Where it's relevant, as I know you were going to speak more about this, do talk about the role of the Global North, what that should be in supporting the work of these movements, but we can also come back to this in the audience questions as well if it doesn't fit so well. Thank you, Susie. Around 3 minutes if you can. We'll move on to audience questions after that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. And let me start to say, again, maybe more from the international role or bringing different people together. I think it's really important that we talk about the women and girls here in particular. We need to listen to each other. We need to learn with and from each other. And I think very important, we need to be able to inspire each other, right? To give us hope. Because often it's a grim world. It's not a very hopeful world always, but it's really important. And in that, I think we will be united. And of course, I see in the chat, of course, men have to play a role, but it's also important that actually women have a role, and a big role as well, because history showed us something very different. And in that way, it's important that the women are united and give each other inspiration. And I think it's in that it's also important to understand, and we talked already about those today, to see that there are different crises happening at the same time, right? So we talked already about the biodiversity, food crisis or seed crisis. We're talking about the climate crisis, and there was also a question about COVID, and we are still in the middle of a health crisis. And so we do need to put those together, and can't single out one crisis or play against one crisis against the other, against another crisis. And within that, while I say that, I think we know we are living in a capitalistic system, but we also know it's a system of patriarchy and oppression. And I think the role of women's movements and different intersecting maybe with other movements is really to break that capitalistic system, to break that system of oppression and patriarchy. And I feel it's happening already slowly and more, but we are far away from being out of that and having a system of peace, having a system of well-being and care economy, and where growth is actually not the main principle. And in ending that, yes, the global north, like countries where I'm in, Belgium or Germany or the Europe, the US and other countries and region in the global north, they do have a massive responsibility in all of that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been in the situation how we are now, kind of the wealth global north and the poorer global south in general terms. Of course, there are differences within that as well. But we do need to take on that responsibility. And if I say we, I mean the people and the governments in the global north. And we see very clearly the IPCC or science is very clear on that, that climate impacts will be harder, will be faster coming, will be everywhere, and specifically hitting the poorest and most vulnerable communities. We talked about that today, first and hardest. So we do have a massive role in kind of telling that story, and also working against that, and working against the big lobbying of transnational corporations. We heard already today are present in Uganda and in other countries like Shell or Total or the formerly named Monsanto, now it's called the Bayer. So I think this is a massive challenge we are facing. But in coming together as women and creating a bigger and bigger women's movement that's intersectional, I think there's a lot of beauty and a lot of hope in there. And maybe with that, I'm ending that I'm very hopeful in that, while there are grim times that we can't overlook. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you so much, Susie. Thank you for this reminder on the importance of inspiring each other and being united, and also the role of movements in breaking the system of patriarchy and moving on to a future that we all want to see. Thank you all. You've given us a lot to think about, and I'm going to hand over to Jenny for questions from the audience.
And now we'll move on to the questions from our audience. Please type any questions in the Q&A function, and we'll hand over to Natasha, who has been collecting your questions. Natasha, you can also select questions from chat for audience members to read, or if not comfortable, read them out, please.
Thank you, Jenny. For the purposes of time, I'm going to read out the question that we've had in the chat function from one of our audience members. So this question is from Rahima Namarone, and the question is directed to Sostine and relates to intersectionality. So from her observation, in Uganda has to a great extent seen positive laws in line with environmental protection. And the question is two parts. Firstly, to what extent are the women who are more vulnerable and affected by climate change, such as those in remote rural areas, those with disabilities, single mothers, and elderly women, to what extent do they know the provision of those laws, those progressive laws? And the second part of the question is what strategies have been taken to protect such women against land grabbing and the denial of their land rights and other land rights? And that's to Sostine.
Thanks, Natasha, and the question is very clear. I would start by saying that the Ugandan constitution has a lot of provisions that protect women that have disabilities. When you, for example, look at Article 26 of 1995 of the Ugandan Constitution, where it provides for the rights and dignity of each citizen. But the challenge that we have is that these laws are provided for, but it is the implementation part that is actually letting us down. And when it comes to also women being aware if these provisions actually exist, then they do not know because of the kind of structural issues in the communities. They are surrounded by patriarchy in the way our communities are structured, but also the way power is used. So you can find women not being able to understand these entitlements. But experience, for example, from the Power Project has shown us that if women are aware of the entitlements in the Constitution, they are able to demand by referencing to those very legal instruments. And when corporates and governments know that these women are making demands according to what the Constitution provides, then there is some progress in taking steps ahead. And when it comes to how do you create more inclusive spaces for women that have these needs and are impacted by climate change? I think absolutely it still goes to what we were conversing today about the eco-feminist movement, solidarity and support from other women, being able to have women groups of disabilities, for example, like Hoima Blind Women Association, supporting a certain sister from Amuru who has a disability need, but also working with organizations, environmental justice organizations and women's rights organizations like NAPE to be able to provide disability needs, to be able to ensure that their participation is provided for, to ensure that companies and hotels have ramp services so that these women can be able to wheel into the meetings that are provided so that they can learn better about their rights. Yeah. Thanks, Natasha. Back to you.
Thank you so much for that answer, Sostine. The next question we have is from Fiona Wilkes, and she asks, what challenges, but also opportunities, do you see for tackling the issues discussed today in the context of COVID-19? That's not directed to any particular panelist, so I'll allow Jenny and Alex to decide who answers.
Okay, let's hear from Susie. And then I think we'd have time maybe for one more before we need to move to closing. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Fiona. I mean, I think if you look at COVID, I sometimes think it showed us exactly the patterns we will see in the climate crisis, and we start seeing in the climate crisis, but just in a compromised, let's say, time. And I think the pandemic, it's not over, far from being over. But for me, it's a smaller version of the climate or the biodiversity or the food crisis. And what you see again is for me, I'm always, it's not my responsibility, but I'm always ashamed, saying that. But it is the role and the responsibility, again, of the global north. And we see it with, patterns on vaccines and not reaching the global south, specific African countries and else. And so you see exactly the same patterns of the capitalistic system that you see in the climate crisis. So to end, I think we should actually learn a lot from the past 2 years and put them into place, the mistakes and all the failures we did, and turn them into right activities and right actions for dealing with the other crisis. And yeah, maybe I stop here because it's a bigger question, and maybe you have a follow-up question on that, or we can also follow up bilaterally. That's also totally great.
Thanks for that, Susie. I think perhaps we're running low on time. I don't see any other questions in the chat function, but we have a couple through the Q&A. I wonder if any of our panelists might be able to respond directly in the chat function on the Q&A while we move to the closing remarks of the event. I'll hand back to you, Alex.
Thank you so much. Before we move to those closing remarks, we're going to have a poll. So please, could everyone take a moment to fill this in about how accessible you found our event today and how we can improve accessibility in the future. So if one of my colleagues could please share that poll. If you are using the Nepali interpretation, If you're using the Nepali interpretation, please select number 1 in the first poll and share any feedback on how we can improve accessibility in the box for the second poll. If anyone has any difficulties, just share that feedback in the chat. And now while you're doing that, I'll hand back to Jenny for a final question.
Thank you, Alex. And now we move on to our final question to all our panelists. What one key recommendation would you like to leave us with? This goes out to all our panelists. I'll start with you, Joan.
Also, if we could all just keep this to a very short recommendation of about a minute each. Thanks.
Soka kusiima NAPE hawokutusagikamu ebyo byona ebituukora kandi ninsaba NAPE n'ebitongole ebindi bijja bituyamba omukwegesa muno abakyala okulwanira obugabe bwa buhaitaka na muno abo bakusumbusibwa gavumenti nejja netuya omu bicweka byaitu n'ebitwara kandi ninsaba eyo mwongere kuwija mututendeke engeri tukusobola kukolamu amakara niko tutangire okutema emiti kandi musobole twegesa okutangira okutema emiti niko tutwale obuhangwa bwaitu haiguru.
I thank so much NAPE for the support they have given us in terms of creating awareness and strengthening us as women to support and defend our land rights. We call upon NAPE to continue and other partners to continue supporting us in the way of learning on the alternative sources of energy. For instance, the making of bricks and the use of biogas and other alternative sources of energy so that we can be able to minimize on the environmental degradation through using other sources other than the fuel wood, that is charcoal and firewood. I thank you so much for all the support. Whatever we have done, it has been because of the support of NAPE, and we uphold everyone to come and support us in that cause as we fight for our land rights and environmental rights as women for climate justice.
Thank you, Joan. That was brilliant. We can now move on to Sostine. What one key recommendation would you like to leave us with?
Thanks, Jenny. I think for me, I believe that the available alternatives already live and exist within the way women take care of the environment, regenerate nature. And I think we need to extend that knowledge a little bit more, have spaces where it is intentional so that it comes to the fore. And once it has come to the fore, like Joan talked about kitchen gardening, this is something that we can scale far and wide, and then we can use it as a basis to counteract the common narrative, but also as a basis to change policies and practices that exist. Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for being with us here today. Over to you, Jenny.
Thank you, Sostine. Now, over to you, Junita. One key recommendation you would like to leave with us?
Thank you. Question को लागि recommendation मेरो चाहिँ अघि धेरै किचन गार्डनको कुरा थियो, त्यो किचन गार्डनको वास्तवमै राम्रो अघि जुन राम्रो कुरा भन्नुभयो त्यो चाहिँ मोडल हामीले पनि सिक्न पाए भने यस्ता कुराहरू ग्रामीण महिलाहरूमा नेपालका ग्रामीण आदिवासी महिलाहरूसम्म पुर्याउन पाए भने उहाँहरूले त्यसलाई चाहिँ वातावरण संरक्षणको लागि पनि प्रयोग गर्नुहुन्थ्यो, आफ्नो परिवारको लागि पनि प्रयोग गर्नुहुन्थ्यो र अझै त्यसलाई रूपमा गर्न सक्यो भने अर्थोपार्जनसँग आर्थिक सशक्तिकरणसँग पनि महिलाहरूलाई जोड्न सकिन्थ्यो भन्ने चाहिँ मलाई लागेको छ। र यस्तो इभेन्टहरू चाहिँ अझै यो हामीलाई जुन एउटा अवसर दिनुभयो त्यसको लागि धेरै आयोजक संस्थाहरूलाई धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद। र यो यस्तो इभेन्टहरू चाहिँ ग्लोबली रूपमा भइरहेको कुराहरू चाहिँ अहिले जस्तै हामी जस्तो महिला अधिकार कर्मीहरूसम्म मात्रै सीमित छ, हाम्रो पनि अझै तलको नेटवर्क च्याप्टरहरूसम्म पनि पुर्याउन पाइयो र यो चाहिँ यस्तो इभेन्टहरू चाहिँ हर साल अथवा यो भइरहेर हामी सबैको एक्सेस भयो भने हामीले अझै धेरै कुराहरू सेयर गर्न सक्छौँ, एकअर्कामा सिक्न सिकाउन सक्छौँ भन्ने लाग्छ। हस्, धन्यवाद।
Well, thank you, Junita, as well. Finally, we shall hear from you, Suzanne.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jennifer. I think I'd like to repeat maybe one sentence I said before. It's general, but I do think, yeah, it gives me the hope that, again, we need to inspire each other and we need to be united. And only if we are united, then we are strong and we are powerful. And you know, there's this famous saying of united, we will never be defeated, that probably maybe many of us could use already in demonstrations. So maybe with that, I will end and keep it very short. And thank you very much for everybody who was organizing that webinar. And thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very grateful for being with you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Suzanne. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Thanks, Suzanne. Thank you, all of you. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for these great recommendations, which we will capture for our advocacy work and share with you all. Also, look out for a blog on how to take the ideas from this event forward, which will be coming soon. Thank you all so much for coming to our event and for contributing to such an enriching and hopeful discussion. We see that there have been other questions in the chat, and colleagues have put the email address in the chat for us to respond. We hope that you feel inspired by what you've heard here today to make change in some of the ways that our panel have suggested. Thank you all. Thanks for coming. It's been a pleasure. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Take care.